Listen, thank you very much for joining today's webinar. My name is Ben. I'm a partner at Gowling WLG, and I lead our sustainability group. And it is my pleasure to moderate today's panel, who I will introduce to you shortly. So we have three expert speakers, not a single PowerPoint in sight, which is exciting. We're going to have a structured conversation for about 35, 40 minutes or so. There are opportunities to ask questions somewhere at the bottom. I'm not sure what button you press, probably the one that says Q&A. I haven't really played with it. I don't press any buttons down there in case I click the leave button. But we will pick those up at the end, or if they're sort of relevant to the conversation, we'll pick those up as we go. And the recording will be sent to you once we've edited it, so that should land in your inboxes to share with colleagues in about a week or so. So, right. Small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, make up approximately 90% of businesses globally, and they account for roughly 50 to 60% of GDP in most economies. But yet they're often in that invisible middle space of supply chain sustainability conversations. So they're often overshadowed by large multinationals whose logos appear on the final products. And when we talk about sustainable supply chains, we tend to picture a boardroom in a glass tower with a chief sustainability officer and a PowerPoint deck the size of a novel. And what we don't really picture is that 20-person precision engineering business in Essex wondering what Scope 3 even means. But yet that business is where the real action happens. So SMEs are estimated to contribute about 40% of business-related carbon emissions in the UK, and you just can't decarbonize your supply chain without them. And large companies are increasingly required to scrutinize their entire value chain, which means sustainability obligations are cascading down to SMEs, whether they like them or not, and whether they're ready or not. And the International Trade Centre, according to my research this morning, has found that fewer than 20% of SMEs in developing countries are certified to an international sustainability standard, which is often demanded by large international buyers. So it's not just an environmental problem, it's potentially a market access problem. So what we've done, in effect, is we've told SMEs that they've got to save the planet, fill in a 90-page questionnaire, and they've got to do it with a minimal budget. So you are going to find today's webinar extremely useful, whether you are an SME or whether you are engaging with them. We have got three chapters to our conversation. So we're going to talk firstly about the strategic risk. Then we're going to talk about the limitations of working with poor quality data. And then finally, we're going to tackle three challenges all at once. So the challenge of capturing good quality data, how to engage with SMEs in large numbers, and how you create that long-lasting change through the process. So I'm delighted today to be joined by three speakers. I have Frankie Hewitson, the founder of the Frank Impact Company and The Chain. I have Sam Seddon, Head of Growth and Strategy at Zella, and Hannah Cool, Senior Advisor to Government, Lenders and Not-for-Profits, and was previously the convener of the Bankers for Net Zero initiative in the UK, leading on SMEs and sustainability data. I wonder if you could all just briefly introduce yourself, for doing a far better job than I can, and how you fit into the SME picture. So Hannah, I'm going to come to you first.
Amazing. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. I'm very glad there's not a PowerPoint in sight this afternoon and just conversation with the gang. I sit at the intersection, I guess, of finance, big corporates and their supply chains, and SMEs. So as you said, for the last 18 months, I've convened an initiative called Bankers for Net Zero, which brought together financial organisations largely that recognise that allocating capital to transform businesses in the real economy, so SMEs, was absolutely critical in one, achieving a more sustainable, resilient, net zero aligned economy, but also from a credit risk perspective. There is a growing recognition in the banks that I speak to that understanding exposure, whether it's from a physical risk, whether it's from a supply chain, whether it's from an energy price volatility perspective, is not just climate risk data, it's credit risk data. And finding a way to feed those two things together is becoming critical for banking partners. So, the work that I'm doing when it comes to a supply chain is recognizing, well, how does money flow to SMEs within supply chains that need to restructure, that need to think about energy sourcing, that need to think about building more resilient business practices. And as you rightly said, for the last year, we've led a government initiative which is all around streamlining and simplifying data requirements. So I am not a fan of questionnaire allocation. Hopefully during this chat, we'll get to talk about why, but that's probably enough from me for now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hannah. We have our first soundbite. Climate data is credit risk data. Love it. Sam, I'm going to come to you next, please.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you for having me. So yeah, I'm Sam from Zeller. Zeller has been around for about 3 or 4 years, and our specialist focus is on SMEs and carbon emission reporting. So at essence, we are a data and behaviour change platform designed to guide and support SMEs, of which there are about 5.5 million in the UK, towards most importantly, a financially and environmentally sustainable future, and to support value chain owners that they work with to give them the necessary regulatory data and reporting data that they need. My background is in big B2B technology, so I am an unabashed techie. I used to sort of have CDs when those things existed, put them in drawers and build big technology systems. So I'm with Hannah on the data side of things. I spent a lot of probably too much time in data. I've designed big business transformation programs latterly for large organizations, FTSE 100 organizations, and big focus on partnerships and alliances to drive change and deliver value. And then moved into more of the corporate strategy and brand strategy space, leading global sustainability programs for big corporates. And I use all of that history and experience in the SME sector, from communications all the way through to tech, in terms of what we do in the market with our larger corporation clients and our smaller SME customers.
Perfect. Sam, thank you for joining us. And then finally, Frankie.
Hi everyone. Yes, and thank you for having me. I'm really excited about today's webinar. So yes, I'm Frankie Hewitson. I'm the founder of the Frank Impact Company and the Chain platform. So, I mean, my background is working directly with fashion brands and factories on sustainable strategy. And what became really clear is actually the industry is, as well as systems are not built for SMEs in the supply chain, and it's not because they are not willing to be involved or actually document their progress. It's the fact that they're simply not set up to support them. So we built the chain, and it basically is a platform that enables brands, and also SME brands as well, to basically collect real supply-led data across their traceability, across wages, carbon certifications, and connect also directly with products as well. But the main focus is actually making it so it's easier for the suppliers. In a lot of cases, as we talked about when it comes to the endless questionnaires and a lot of manual inputting. The idea is actually make it simpler for the suppliers to actually get involved and be part of that progress. So a lot of what I'll be showing today is on hands-on experience across the brand side, SME brands, but also the SME suppliers as well in the supply chain. So that's me.
Perfect. I'm slightly concerned we're beating up 90-page questionnaires already. As the token lawyer in the room, I love paper, and being surrounded by it. So sounds like I might be in the minority though. But right, let's do chapter 1. So I want to talk about strategic risk here. Before we get into the detail a bit later, so I want to talk about things like, why are SME emissions a growing vulnerability for an ESG strategy? How are stakeholders, customers, investors, funders, how are they scrutinizing Scope 3 disclosures more closely? But Hannah, if I could start with you, and you've kind of alluded to a little bit, but why do banks care about this stuff?
So there's a few reasons, and despite the rhetoric that we might hear, and net zero getting a really hard time, and emissions focus getting a really hard time, this is ultimately regulated. So from a banking perspective, there are European, global, and also UK regulations which force a focus on understanding emissions reporting and financed emissions across their portfolios. So the regulation that really kicked this off was TCFD, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And that's now kind of morphed into European CSRD, which is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And even UK regulators have now released supervisory statements that reinforce that banks must treat, I repeat, must treat climate risk as a core financial risk. So there are a number of kind of market forcing mechanisms that mean that this focus on emissions, but also understanding, resilience within your portfolios and through your big corporates and their supply chains is really important. Now, if I think about one of the banks that I've been working with, this isn't just around their SME portfolios. This is thinking about their big corporate clients and understanding where the future trajectory might be if, I won't use company names, but imagine a big potato and chip producer in little freezer bags. They work with one of my banking clients. Understanding their sourcing of potatoes to make said chips is ever so important for the future longevity, viability, and resilience of their ultimate operating model, right? So, the work that's being put in place to understand whether there is default risk and whether capital needs to be allocated as contingent capital at a systems level is still going on. And it goes back to my point that climate risk data is credit risk. Now, there's a theme in Sam and Frankie and I guess my introductions, which was around data. And that sounds really boring, doesn't it? But we're all after the same data. And the work that I've done over the last year, Frankie, to your point, is how do we simplify this? Because the worry is we have created a system that is really top down, right? Market regulation targeted at the biggest banks, the biggest financial services companies, the biggest corporates with the biggest supply chains that all say, tell me your exposure, calculate your emissions. And ultimately, those requests get pushed down to all the SMEs, right? So I spoke to SMEs. I ran loads of workshops last year with SMEs up and down the country. One guy runs a manufacturing business, had 16 sustainability forms and requests that he had to fill out for procurement processes, for existing suppliers, all that he had to do over his Christmas break with zero response at the end of it, right? Part of what we need to do is recognize the kind of regulatory and the risk is real, right? I'm not saying the risk isn't real, but we need to recognize that risk, but recognize how that manifests through the supply chain and start to focus on standardizing and simplifying the data requirements, because ultimately data is key, insight is much needed, the financing is much needed, but how that feeds back into decision grade data, we have to create a process for, and that's some of the work that I can talk about later. But that's why banks and big corporates are interested.
Perfect. So Frankie, from finance to fashion, from cool to cooler. Obviously, yeah, you obviously got a background in fashion and textiles. Are you finding is SME struggling with sustainability? Is that a particular issue for your sector, or does it go across everywhere?
It's definitely cross sector, but I think with fashion in particular, I feel like it's extra difficult at the moment because you're talking about the brands now with obviously extra due diligence, and obviously the reporting that they have to do, but they've got suppliers all around the world. They'll have a supplier in India of 50 people. They'll also have a supplier in China of 2,000 people. And though both of those those factories have to provide the same information. So you've got certain situations where data just isn't digitized, sources are incredibly limited. The kind of the education, the training there is different. A lot of these suppliers will be like, well, we don't need to do that. We're a small unit in Chennai. We don't need to fill in this information. And but you'll also have the other side. You'll have suppliers which are huge that will send a huge amount of information, and it's how that is all collected, but also, like kind of was saying, you'll have also multiple ways of filling this information, and this one factory will have requests and they'll get this fatigue of like asking the same questions over and over again, but slightly different, and they'll need a slightly different piece of information, and they need to use slightly different data as a benchmark. So we find that it's not the fact that they're unwilling, it's just that they're simply not equipped, and that's where I feel like the real gap is.
Perfect. Yeah, and it's interesting picking up sort of Hannah's point that the guy wrote 16 different questionnaires and didn't get a response, and I guess that sense of frustration of you're filling in all this different questionnaires and different data and questioning whether someone's really reading it, or is it just going in the too difficult pile.
Completely. I mean, we had a situation like when I used to run a supplier, and the brands used to ask us for information. It would take us weeks to collect it from all the different factories, and then we wouldn't hear anything. And then 2 weeks later, we'd get emails saying, "Actually, can we push prices down, please?" And you can't help but think that has something to do with the information that you're sending. That anything that that it's a bit of a vulnerability. You're sharing so much about your factory, your building, everything. People are asking for your bills breakdown of actually how much you're spending. You don't
Yeah.
hear anything back, and then you're like, actually, let's push prices down, please.
So Hannah's decision
Is
grade
that
data being
trust?
used for the wrong decisions. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the worry is, right, and frankly, I hear you. We've heard from so many SMEs exactly that. And the worry is that we've got into this position where, the more I look, the more I share, the worse I look.
Mm.
And that absolutely shouldn't be the case, right? The reason that the system demands this information is to understand risk exposure, right? And ultimately, there should be a view that if I'm not sharing this information back, actually, I'm going to be viewed as a worse risk almost. Like, you need to know that the information you're sharing is to your benefit, but actually, that's not what you're getting back. That isn't what's being reinforced through this process. And the work that we've done with government is saying, look, we're not going to regulate SMEs. We shouldn't regulate SMEs. But we need to normalise that in regulating the top of the market, we need to standardise and simplify what gets filtered through supply chains. And if we can do that and set the expectation and normalise the ask, but something really important we need to do is for SMEs benefit is, one, the value exchange back needs to be clear. What do I get out of this? And that is on the big suppliers, the big corporates and the banks. And recognising as well that if you create this once, you can share it many, right? So it's not like one-to-one. I've got 16 different forms that I need to fill out in different ways. It's actually, I've actually done this before. Here, have this.
Yeah.
Perfect.
That's what we've tried to do with the chain, with our platform, is you can upload things that you've already sent to other people. So you don't have to do it again.
Real.
Just upload it, and then AI will process all that and fill it all in for them. And multi-language, because that's also the issue. We're asking them to fill it all out in English.
Absolutely right. That's so important.
Yeah. Right, Sam, I'm going to bring you in here. So Zella's obviously been created to help. Well, Frankie and Hannah have beautifully explained why this is an issue, and so we're looking to you to be part of the solution, part of the fix here. But a slightly provocative question: is it? It sounds like a lot of hard work for a big business to be dealing with all these SMEs. I mean, if you're a time poor business, is it a good use of time, or how can you? And how can you smooth things over? How can you make it better?
So I think the kind of provocative response to that is that you don't really have a choice, and I say that in a few different ways. So if for organisations that are signed up to a regulatory framework, they're signed up to a self-defined one like the Science Based Targets Initiative, or they're needing to report from a regulatory perspective, then Scope 3 will bring in your SME supply chain. So if it's to do with SBTI, more than 40% of your total emissions are in your Scope 3, then you need to report on around 67% of your emissions in your Scope 3 supply chain. We talked earlier about the fact there's 5.5 million SMEs in the UK, talked about the fact that they relate to about 40% of the UK's total carbon emissions and about 60% of business emissions. You don't need to be a maths and statistics expert to realise that SMEs are in your supply chain and you need to be reporting on them. But I think what we've just been touching on there is about the fact that, well, a couple of things. One is the design of the entire system, as Hannah has very clearly articulated, is it's been designed top down, and it's been designed by people that understand regulation. And if you understand regulation, then you tend to come with a stick. And in this scenario, sticks don't work. And the way that a lot of larger organizations engage with their supply chain is through procurement. The procurement tends to come with I'm a purchaser and therefore I've got a stick. So it's stick upon stick in this scenario. There is the incentive to engage and the incentive to change isn't there as we've talked about. But nonetheless, the larger organizations up the value chain will have a risk in their supply chain if they don't engage. And the reason for that is that it's okay understanding where you are and baselining where you are, but you've got to hit a target which is a reduction target. And that reduction target requires you to do one or two. I'm going to do less, which isn't good for growth, or I need to support and engage my SMEs to actually drive their emission numbers down. Now, that is a completely different challenge from give me your data. So we've been, as Zella, working with Hannah and a number of members of the organisation, her organisation, around that data standardisation for SMEs, because it is so important, as we heard from the 16 forms and no responses, that there is a standard approach to this so it becomes simple. But the risk for larger organisations is that if you are just using your large enterprise systems and enterprise approaches to try and engage your SMEs, one, your engagement level will be low. Yeah. And two, the quality of the data you receive back will be poor, because there's no incentive for an organisation that is struggling with national insurance, that's struggling with business rates, that's struggling with energy prices, that's trying to drive revenue growth, to focus on this. So, the UK Business Bank's latest data shows that there's about 77% of SMEs taking at least one action around this space. And they are seeing some benefits of it, but the largest proportion of SMEs do not see benefit in this space. And that's the risk, that we won't drive action and change. And that's why we have to think of this whole space differently if we want to both meet our regulatory requirements and drive targeted reductions.
Perfect. Well, let's talk about incomplete data, and I think Hannah. So, we talk about quality of data and what have you. I mean, again, trying to be provocative, is an estimate good enough? If an SME is time poor, focusing on the business, can they not just send annual numbers up to the corporate?
I'm going to give you a really annoying answer and say yes and no.
I'm used to that.
But this is about the standardization point, right? We recognize that scope 3, understanding emissions through your supply chain is really important. But ultimately, we don't have quality SME data, because there are loads of different ways and different calculators that have broadly black box methodologies on how those emissions figures are calculated. So emissions is, to a certain extent, the scope 3, I hate to say it, a bit of a random number generator. And that's really bad if what a big organization wants to show is trend over time. And that's a problem, right? So unless we can get a bit more specific on, here's the calculator, here's the data inputs, this is what we want from you, we're never going to increase the quality or reasonableness of the market estimates that are available at the moment. And that's kind of where the standard comes in, because ultimately emissions, if we understood energy consumption for an individual SME and used a broadly, it doesn't even have to be perfect, but a broadly standardized methodology to calculate emissions, and there were clear tools and calculators that were provided for by the big corporates, by the big banks to do that, we'd have much better quality data floating around the system. But my concern at the moment is we don't, and we're using numbers that make sense for the point and purpose that we're trying to put forward in whatever narrative we're generating today. And that's not ideal. Some of the work that I've been doing, even at an individual asset level, is looking at some of the model data available in the market when you compare that to, actual consumption data, and then how that is ultimately converted into emissions. And the differences are stark. You're looking at between a 50 to 80% difference between actual consumption data converted to emissions versus modeled data that's available based on market estimates. That's wild, right? So we need to start focusing on driving a better approach to data collection into the market, working out what quality looks like, and then pushing that through the system, because otherwise the estimates are going to get worse, not better, unfortunately. The banks have to report against a quality framework called PCAF, which is a standardized methodology that says, based on your reporting and your emissions figures that you are publicly disclosing, can you put a quality score against it? And if you're a lower quality score of PCAF 4, it means you're basing most 4 or 3, you're basing most of your data on market modeled and estimated data. Whereas what we want to get to is level 1 or level 2, which means contributed data, granular data, understanding SME data, for example. So systems like Frankie and the work that Sam and Zella are doing is exactly how you get to that higher quality score. But at the moment, we're not creating a system that is thought about from the perspective of the SME. How do I make life easier for the SME? And I want every big business to be thinking like that, putting SMEs first always.
Perfect. Frankie, when we had our sort of a conversation to prepare for today, you talked about some data sets being available in the market. And I mean, is that a solution? Just, I know SMEs don't have loads of money to throw at the problem, but buy the data set that gives broad indications of what your industry is doing.
Yeah, I mean that's yes. I mean the thing is, like, for example, like we've got brands at the moment that are, they need to collect data on wages, and like on the platform we collect data on wages, on, obviously we've got the audits, you've got, and you collect that data from, like, kind of like HIG, for example, for CO2 data for products. But you see, if you're asking, that's expensive data to collect. Data is expensive. And you're asking, for example, the factory to do audits. That's thousands of pounds a year on audits. That's thousands of pounds a year on collecting that data, actually getting, like, signing up for these data sets, for the brand. And also these are still SME brands, let's just say, we've still got these kind of rules, these regulations still apply to brands who are under £1 million. And if they're kind of expected to spend £20,000 on living wage estimate data, they're £20,000 on CO2 data, they simply can't afford it. So what you have is, you then have a mixed bag of lots of different data sets being used, lots of different methodologies being used that are kind of lined up to different regulations, and it gets messy. What we're trying to do is the fact that, especially on the SMEs, they get access to these data sets that we have on the platform, and it just means that we've got a little bit more, and then all their suppliers can also have access to that data as well. However, you also have that argument that this data is expensive. It takes a lot of time to collect this data, to pull it all together, and that also needs to be paid for. That it needs to be respected and it needs to be paid for. So we have a real kind of issue there of who pays for this data, because everyone is expected to use it. And so, I mean, that's, and like, to repeat what kind of both Sam and Hannah have said, is the fact that it's, if your data is weak, then your claims are weak. And what I try to say to brands at the moment, small brands and large brands, is that brands are no longer judged on kind of what they say, what they kind of market, but on actually proof of what they can prove. And that is really difficult, because that responsibility gets pushed down to the suppliers, and they have to then prove it. And you find as well, I mean, we find that, because obviously we work with fashion supply chains, which is obviously, you have your tier 1s, which is your main factory, and it goes down to tier 4, which is your cotton producer, say. And a lot of brands are putting a lot of pressure on those tier 1 factories to be responsible for the tier 4 cotton farms, even though those tier 1 factories have nothing to do with those cotton farms. But they're expected to be responsible for them, and expected to collect all that data and provide all that data. And it's a lot of responsibility, I believe.
Okay. Sam, you mentioned you used to be used to work for large businesses, so we're going to pick on you a bit again. And there's been a really interesting observation by Keith in the questions, where he talks about how frustrating it was to get those 16 questionnaires with no response. But actually, he's got an example. I think that's probably the International Chamber of Commerce UK publication about big business in SME supply chains not providing the data, whether because either whether they haven't got it, or whether maybe they just don't think giving that information to the SME is worth their time. But so my question to you is there appetite in big, large organizations to work and support SMEs doing this stuff? Because SMEs are clearly struggling, it's clearly important, but are they set up to deal with the dozens or hundreds of SMEs in their supply chain?
So I think Frankie's spot on in some data is expensive, and getting data right is expensive. So, all of the technology projects I've ever worked on, the starting point is always, what's the quality of your data? Do you have the right governance in place? Do you have the right processes in place and control processes? Are you making sure that the quality of it, the validation of it is right? That takes time, and it takes organization, and it takes structure. In many large organizations, that will exist when it comes to core business data, but the carbon data that you're looking for, the reporting data in this space, quite often isn't deemed to be that. If you transpose that from a large organization which is set up with a team of people or a set of people that are looking to try and capture this, and transpose it into an SME, they're absolutely not set up to do it. So within the larger organization, is there the appetite to engage with SMEs? Generally, I would say yes, but there is a lack of time. And there is a lack of understanding as to how to do that. Because as I mentioned earlier on, there's a different engagement model you need to take with this set of your suppliers, because they aren't set up. And then on the flip side, the SMEs themselves are time poor, they're knowledge poor. There's the what's in it for me. So you get this sort of standoff between people that are needing it and want it quickly and will use the levers that are available to them, generally through the procurement route, and the organizations that are having the demands placed upon them that really just don't know what to do. So you get into this kind of lack of resource at both ends of the spectrum. So the way that you need to sort of reimagine that is around the simplification of that request, the standardization of that request, and then in order to drive value for both ends, which is what's going to be needed to drive up engagement, is what's in it for both ends of the value chain, not just what's in it for the top end. So that incentivization model for the smaller organization, so if you do this once, you're in a better position to respond to the other 15 requests that come in. That's going to save you time. If you follow these actions through, then this will save you money. The outcome of that is your carbon footprint will fall. It's an outcome of the process that you can go through. And that's the kind of direction of travel that we are looking to try and take organizations on. But is, until we can create incentivizations for the SMEs to engage, either in saving them time, making it simple, saving them money, the engagement levels will continue to be low at the bottom end of the spectrum, which means at the top end in the value chain, the incentivization in the organizations up there is low because it becomes too hard. But all the time, the regulatory clock is ticking.
Yeah.
And the commitments that have been made aren't going away. So that's the risk profile that we're running with at the moment.
Which I think, Hannah, is a perfect time to bring you back to talk about. I guess the obvious incentive to me for an SME to give the data is to keep your customer happy. And if you learn something, but what else is in it for them? What we know, what I know we've sort of spoken about what some of the lenders are potentially doing, but what's in it for the SMEs from your perspective?
So the work that we've been doing is that connective tissue, right? How do we create this data sharing ecosystem which reduces burden on the SME, but gives banks and corporates the data they need, back and forth, exactly as Sam was talking about. And in that scenario, if we get this connective tissue or this missing middle layer, as we see it, right, the access to capital will improve. Now, this isn't just about taking out debt, which we know is not on the majority of SMEs, priorities, especially if you look at recent surveys. But there are new models, whether it is, Octopus zero bills. So, you can buy in to new community energy infrastructure, and then, the investment that you are making in energy infrastructure with bank partnership actually then means that your bills, your energy bills, month by month, are significantly reduced, if not zero. Hence, Octopus zero bills. Check it out. But finding ways to deploy capital in new innovative ways that are net neutral to the SME is what we're looking at, right? So you don't feel like you're taking out lending, but you're getting access to the support you need in order to transition, transform, and ultimately make your business more resilient, but hopefully lower energy costs as well. The kind of visibility. So to your point, Ben, totally, this is about access to customers as well. I go back to, whilst the rhetoric in the news and the media is, net zero is dying, for now at least, the regulatory requests are still there, and this focus on resilient supply chains and resilient customer bases and looking at the potential credit risk is going to continue regardless, right? So making sure that you are meeting the expectations of your customers and lenders and banking partners will become ever more important, and the guidelines of what that looks like are going to become clearer and more granular as well. Because if you think about it, the financial and regulatory PRA guidance has only just come out at a banking level. So actually how that manifests and trickles down, as we've been talking about, into customer onboarding guidelines is going to happen over the next 18 months and beyond. So we are going to continue to see changes there. And I guess, maintaining a level of competitive advantage in that space as we see more and more customers finding different and new ways to partner with institutions to share information and build trust and confidence.
We've had another question from Keith, but I would please encourage you to go into the Q&A and ask any questions of our experts. And Frankie, I might come to you in a minute to talk about the nature positive question. But Sam, we talked about incentives. We talked about we touched a little bit on about how we sort of how a large large organization might try to sort of interact with customers at scale. But how do they? Is it just a simple questionnaire that they produce? Is there more to it that the large businesses can use to engage their SMEs?
Yeah, there is, absolutely. I think that what that comes down to is how to make positive interventions. So our product has been designed with an SME in mind to make the capturing of the baseline data simple and easy. It automates a whole chunk of what you need to put in. It provides guidance as you go through, and it becomes your system of record, your passport for future requests. It becomes that system of record for, as Hannah was saying, if you are needing to do getting access to capital, all of the information you'd need to support that is in there. Similarly for grants and for other access to capital. So it becomes a very positive tool for you to put your data into. As a result of doing that, we then feed that up the value chain, and what that allows an organization to do up the value chain is to look at that through a new lens, which is with a much greater degree of granularity, as Hannah was saying, a much greater degree of granularity around what is going on in that organization. What are their emissions? What projects have they got? What's the culture look like in that organization? What's that appetite to change? One of the key things we look at is the energy mix, because by rapidly identifying the energy mix, we can identify where are the potential hotspots in those organizations, where you can reach out to them and say, did you know that if you took this action around your energy, not only could you save money, but you'd reduce your emissions, putting you in a better position and putting us in a better position. So at that point, the relationship you're having as up the value chain with your supplier is starting to become more one of partnership. Mm-hmm. Now, partnerships in any business are positive because there is a mutual value exchange. You're going to get a better relationship with your SME supplier, and they're going to have a better relationship with you, which benefits everybody in the round. So by identifying those positive interventions through a very simple dashboard that we've got, you can change the balance of how you are engaging with those SMEs and drive positive action. So that incentivization model, I think, is what we want to be moving to with the upstream value chain owners into one of partnership with the SMEs, not one of regulatory compliance.
Yeah. And Frankie, that sort of leads very nicely, that sort of collaboration and partnership, because I wanted to ask you about if you had examples of that sort of engagement creating a long-term benefit sort of beyond just a simple sort of annual reporting cycle. Does this nudge people into a different direction?
Definitely, and I think in a lot of ways, I mean, a bit of an unpopular opinion, I suppose I have to say, is like, in a case sometimes when it comes to reporting, and when it comes to wanting to have those kind of like for the brands, for the companies to say, oh yeah, we're nature positive or we're net zero, and they can't wait to say those words. We sometimes forget the actual challenge, which is actually kind of like engaging with the suppliers, because it's not just a case of you tick that box and that's great, get on with your work. It's a constant evolution of how you can actually get better data, how you can actually improve data collection and obviously improve like how factories are working. I mean, one of the issues that we do have is, what we've obviously talked a lot about on this panel already is that disconnect between, maybe the fashion brand in kind of my world is they're requesting this from the suppliers, and the suppliers, some, like I say, have it readily available, and others it's completely beyond what they could possibly have. But it's kind of trying to build those kind of relationships up. So, I mean, one of the things which we like is we've seen, especially on factories where they have not had a lot of support. We've found actually we've been actually working with them. We've given them resources. We've given them free resources, especially on the smaller factories, the smaller SMEs, and we've really seen more of a partnership build within those brands. And it's not a case of give me information and then do not work with us again. Like, oh, we can't hear from you again, and you don't see what's happened to that data. Actually, the suppliers have access. They have access to the platform themselves. They can see what's working when it comes to their wages, when it comes to their CO2, product CO2 connected to product. And we've seen an actually kind of an improvement in relationship with the brands as well. There's more of a partnership, and that's what makes me happy.
Good. And Hannah, do you see that too as well, that sort of a momentum building between lender and SME?
Completely. And I think it's this connectivity and this partnering to a certain extent that is going to open up all of the opportunities that have been talked about, ad infinitum in the circles that I work in, which are looking at, long-term financing agreements, reduced interest rates, business rate incentives on the basis of showcasing that you are more energy efficient, renewable energy driven, and operating in a world where you are demonstrating sustainability requirements. These are all things that people talk about, but we aren't able, like, if we're being honest with ourselves, we can't deliver right now. But as soon as we have this kind of trusted data sharing loop and infrastructure, it's the infrastructure that makes this possible. And core to its success is, as Frankie says, and Sam, it's that ongoing feedback loop. It's the insights that are provided, the benchmarking, the financing opportunities, the long-term partnering and contracting support, improved supplier terms. Like, these are the things that need to be doubled down on the basis that we are building resilient, effective, cost-effective supply chains and ultimately in the banking world, banking portfolios.
And also just to like totally interrupt, but like I think a lot of it is like we kind of, when it comes to like reporting and stuff, we tend to look backwards. We're putting all this information in to then look at what happened months ago, when really we should be using this as a way to actually make future decisions. How can we make better products in our supply chain? How can we do it better and reduce our CO2 before those things have even been designed? So, and that is a big thing, I think, which we need to start looking forward instead of backwards.
And that's where my point around credit risk is really important, because credit risk is a backward-looking indicator. It looks at what's come before, whereas when you append climate risk to that figure, that is a forward-looking indicator. That says, actually, on the basis of where my credit risk rating is now, is that going to be materially worse, better, or static on the basis of what I know about this resilient sustainability and emissions data?
Yeah, and I guess if someone's got that data, then they're thinking about being around. They're literally being sustainable. They're thinking, I want to be still in business in 3, 5, 10 years, not just looking to the next 3 or 6 month period. We've had an interesting question from Keith, and actually Keith's given a bit of context, which is fabulous, that he's in the hairdressing salon space. But he asked a question about nature positive, because we've talked a lot about carbon and net zero and decarbonisation. We fall into that trap that I always rail against, of that sort of carbon tunnel vision. But I wondered if any of you sort of got a perspective on that, because as Keith said, look, the biodiversity of nature data is way more complicated. It changes street by street, not like carbon, which is the same the world over. But are SMEs focusing, in your views, are they sort of focusing on carbon at the moment? And when we come back in 3 years' time, are we going to be talking about that nature and biodiversity issue in the supply chain?
And nature and I might jump in if that's all right, guys. Nature and biodiversity is absolutely a focus, especially when you think about kind of physical risk exposure or access to resources. When it comes to the SME farmers that I work with, around looking at crop yields in the future and food stability. Nature, very important. The fact of this conversation, which is all focused around quality data, I think there's another layer, which is what data do we absolutely need from SMEs, and do we need to ask them from a consented and access and informed perspective, versus what data is available to us through other data partnerships, through other providers. I go back to my banking clients, right? They are sourcing data from all sorts of third-party suppliers to give them a picture of risk, exposure, and opportunity across their portfolios. Now, physical risk data is going to be one of those data sets, especially driven by the regulation that the PRA launched at the back end of last year. Now, what do we need to specifically push to an SME to answer? Air quality data we can get as long as we know the location of your business, the location of your assets. Soil quality data, flood risk data, heat and subsidence exposure data. All of this is data that's available through third-party providers. I think we need to be super, super, super critical about what data is market available, and is it on you as a big company to access and provide, versus what are we asking our SMEs? And I will always go back to, we only ask what we can't get.
Yep.
And for me, focusing on asset location data, sector-based data, and energy consumption data has been the priority, because if we get those things right, everything else will materially improve.
Perfect.
Just building on that. I mean, we at the moment aren't capturing that biodiversity data within our platform, and the reason for that is sort of building on what Hannah said, is that at the moment what we're trying to support SMEs on is the base level of data that's being asked through the current regulatory frameworks. There's always been an old there's an adage in any kind of data insight analytics kind of project that you work on, which is don't ask for something you're not going to use.
Exactly.
Because all it does is disincentivize the provision of what you actually do need, because that's hard enough in and of itself. So is it critically important at the moment? Absolutely. Are organizations up the value chain really set up to know how to use it, whether that's in the corporate environment or in the public sector environment? Not well enough for us to go and hassle SMEs for it at this point in time. We work with some sporting organizations, and we were looking at a set of data that they were looking to capture in totality from their members, and the list ran into several hundred lines of just basic member data. Where are you? How big is your organization? How big's the floor space, etc. When it came to the sustainability space, about 50% of it was in what I'd describe as the carbon space, and about 50% of it was in the biodiversity nature space. And the level of granularity they were looking for from these small organizations to provide was quite mind-blowing. And we asked the question, so do you know what you're going to do with that? And what decisions you're going to make off the back of having received it? Because until you can clearly articulate that and articulate down the chain, what's the value exchange in providing that data? You probably just need to have a really strong look at how you're going to go about gathering that. And that's by no means saying it's not important, because it absolutely is. It's just, are we mature enough in the ground to understand how, from an SME perspective at least, to work with that? I'm not sure we are yet, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, we're working on that at the moment on the platform, and a lot of it is being aware as well that, for example, we've got one brand making a viscose dress. Viscose, for those who don't know, is a fiber made from trees. And then and that's just normal viscose, not tracked, not traced. We don't know where it's come from. Then we've got another viscose material that is FSC, certified. So, and it's like that's two different, that's two different fibers produced in two different ways. The dress itself is one made in China, one's made in India. And that alone has so many different, the kind of the CO2 estimate for that is so different, but also the biodiversity impact as well is also so different. How can those factories, one being a small factory in India and another one being a large factory they're using different methodologies, different data sets they've collected to estimate this impact. And one of the, but we're also expected to compare that as well. So you're comparing data that's got two different methodologies, two different sources, and and that at the moment, that's one of the issues that we're facing is we want to use this data to help the design teams in these fashion brands make better choices for the next collections that they're making based on this type of data. But yeah, it's trying to make sure that that's data it's comparable, and at the moment it's not.
Perfect. Thank you. I'm mindful of time, and you have delivered, the three of you have delivered an extraordinarily content-rich webinar already, but I'm going to force you even more into the corner and say you've got to give us one top tip, one takeaway, one, boil down your content just to a soundbite. Who said lawyers are simple creatures? Hannah, I'm going to start with you. You're off mute.
Yeah, no problems. If you are an SME and if you are asked for sustainability data, please can you go back to said organisation and say, are you using the UK voluntary emission standard, which is targeted at SMEs for SMEs? It is a simplified version of the current government sustainability procurement framework, and it is meant to be standardizing and simplifying requests across the marketplace and really focusing on data that SMEs have easy access to. So if you do get asked, my ask to you, rather than a follow-up statement, is please can you go back and say, why aren't you using this?
Hannah, just for people taking notes, repeat it again. What?
The UK voluntary emission standard.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Sam.
So I've got two answers to this. One is for the value chain owners looking to engage their SMEs and gather data and insights. And it would be a one-word answer. It'd be start. This is one of those. I've got kids at university at the moment, and they're trying to do lots of essays. And the hardest thing is always start. Once you've started, you can progress. And the targets that you're going to meet are going to get closer and closer and closer. And the longer you put it off, the harder it will become. From an SME perspective, I would say capture your data once, use it many, and find the right platform for you. I could recommend one, but find the right platform for you that is going to allow you to do that and incentivize cost saving within your business, as well as the ability to provide regulatory reporting upwards.
And if a big organization is asking you to submit data via an Excel, other than sending back an emoji with a vomit face, where is the platform? How are you expecting me to deliver this data? How am I getting insight back? That's the other bit. So yes,
emoji vomit face. I'm going to write down as a
yeah. And another member of the anti-Excel club. Love it. Good. Frankie.
Yes, well, so mine is probably directed to the kind of the companies, the fashion brands in my case, but the companies in general, is if you really want to see Scope 3 progress, stop designing internal systems for reporting and actually start designing systems for the suppliers, because that is where the gap is. And the easier you make it for the SMEs to actually get involved, the better your data, the better the relationship you'll have, the faster the progress. And honestly, if the suppliers don't trust the process, they really won't engage in it at all. So that's my 2 pence.
Amen.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for sharing your insights. I am sure we could have done many more questions if we had another hour, but can I assume that if anyone in the audience wants to drop you a line, they'll find you on LinkedIn, or drop me an email and I'll connect you. But that's been phenomenal. We've flown through that. I have been scribbling loads of notes as well, which so thank you very much for that. I'm sure everyone's giving you a virtual round of applause. And then thank you very much. We will circulate the recording to those who've registered to receive it. And enjoy lunch. Thank you.